Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started? We have quite a lot to tackle on today, and we want to give you some time to be able to ask your questions if time allows. So my name's Sal Munoz, and today we are going to be talking about the quarterly data quality process uh, uh, for the quarter of Q4 2019. This is what we're going to do is give a little bit of context, show you how to run the report itself, and then what we'll also do is try to go through the process of troubleshooting some of the typical questions that you may be seeing when you have to go through the process of fixing your data quality. So let's get started. Now, like I had mentioned, we're going to give you a little bit of context as to why the data quality process is important, and also how we are changing the new reverting back to an older process that was tried and true, given some issues that we had last year with our SQL process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about updates, specifically in regards to the report that you'll be seeing as of later today. And then we'll talk about the timeline for submission, etc. We'll go over some important resources and user support that we are providing. Additionally, we're going to talk about how to access the report, both the DQ and the timeliness report. We'll review the reports, sort of go through tab by tab and tell you what is all part of those reports. And then we'll go into troubleshooting in the training site, where we'll show you how to fix mismatches, show you how to fix HUD verifications, how to fix nulls, etc. And then what we hope to do is address any of your questions that you may have, if time allows, if we're able to get to it. So let's get started with a little bit of housekeeping. Now, one thing that I would encourage you all to do is to submit your questions using the question function of GoToWebinar. I won't be using will not be using the chat box. I will not be unmuting people. I will not be looking at who has their hand raised. What I'll be looking at is who is asking questions. And then in addition to that, I'll ask that if we were not able to get to your questions, always feel free to follow up with us at helpdesk@allchicago.org. That's our new email for the help desk. Of course, if you email hmis@allchicago, it'll still work. And we also have a follow-up webinar on March 18th at 11 a.m. So I'm getting some in. Can people hear me? Can folks hear me? I'm being told that there's no audio, so if someone could send me a message letting me know. Okay. Okay, so people can't hear me. All right. All right, thank you. So we'll be doing a follow-up webinar on March 18th at 11 a.m. Feel free to join that one, and we may be adding an additional one in case we need to do more QA. And this webinar will be recorded and posted to the existing data quality article, so I'm not going to be making a new article or sending this out afterwards. I will be posting them directly to that data quality article, and that'll likely be by tomorrow that I'll make that update. And if you want a printout of the we also have a handout of the various PDFs for that contain the slides for today. So if you look at the handout section of the GoToWebinar app, you'll find it there. And I also wanted to give a few updates actually. So some providers may have been pulling reports earlier this week. The reports that we're going to be looking at today are what the reports will look like as of end of business day today. So just be aware of that the reports that we're going to be pulling, that we're going to be looking at, will likely look differently than if you were pulling the reports earlier this week. And it's just a few small differences, and I'll go over what those differences are as we get into it. But what some providers were referencing is that there were some issues with housing situation questions. So we've dialed back some of the calculations that we were making, and are sort of simply putting it out there in terms of whether it's null or okay, instead of some of the more complicated calculations that we were doing before. So know that your reports, if you ran them earlier this week, are going to look a little bit different, but if you run them after today, they'll look the same way that our report is currently looking. All right, so let's talk a little bit about context. So for our system, we utilize a lot of data-informed approaches to help coordinate services and resources in order to be able to combat homelessness in the city. And it's also been something that's been increasingly important when reporting out to HUD, when reporting out to funders, et cetera. So we are increasingly relying on the fidelity of data to and and as a part of that, what we hope to do is to encourage providers of all funding types to enter accurate, complete, and timely data so that we can make informed decisions as a community. And also, as we have grown in our sophistication with data, as we have grown in our ability to interpret and analyze data to help inform different approaches, we want to be able to um, we want to be able to uh, we want to be able to have a data environment where information can flow with relative ease, and we can trust that the information in there is as accurate as possible. And this also matters because as coordinated entry system has really made its hold on as coordinated entry has really grown in the system, our system is more interconnected now than ever before, and as we move towards being better able to coordinate services amongst each provider for an individual client, it's important that each agency take their data seriously, because your data at agency A may affect the data at agency B if that client were to go through the coordinated entry system to get housed at a PSH provider. So now everything's becoming more interconnected, and it's even more important now to really put an emphasis on keeping clear, clean data. So in order to maintain data quality, we ask providers to participate in the quarterly data quality process, and that will address the following areas: missing values, child-only entries, bed utilization, and timeliness. And all of these compliance rates that we are going to be talking through have already been approved by the HMIS committee, the Chicago Data Quality Work Group. So as a community, these are things that we've decided are important to try to hit. So in terms of who participates, it's all projects regardless of funding. Now, so long as the project is active and has at least one client enrolled, it's expected that the data quality report for said project be submitted. Now, we have a list of currently active projects that'll be a really good starting point for you to be able to refer to. It's about 370 providers. If you notice that there's a project that's inactive at your agency that was defunded, whatever it may be, you actually have to tell us. We don't intuit that. We don't know when projects fold, when projects are no longer around, when they consolidate. That's something that we need. That's something that we need communication from the ATA to let us know. So please look at that list. Let us know if there are any projects that are missing, any projects that should not be on there, so that we can make the adjustments as necessary. But just know that even if you're privately funded, you don't have HUD dollars, you don't have ESG CAPER dollars, you still have to participate in the HMIS data quality process because of the fact that you're inputting data into the HMIS collaborative, and as I had mentioned before, that impacts multiple providers, multiple agencies, multiple clients, not just your own agency. So I know that a lot of people have had confusion in the past where, oh, we don't receive HUD funding, or we don't receive ESG funding, whatever it may be. That doesn't matter. If you're inputting into HMIS for an active project, then we want you to participate in the data quality process for that project. So let's talk a little bit about the report. Now, the process is changing from how it was last year. It's not on here, but as last year, what we had done was attempted a SQL process where we would automatically send providers a SQL email with the entire data quality report already prepackaged. The purpose of going to SQL was so that we could begin to automate reports. We could remove some administrative work off of the providers. But what ended up sort of happening is that the SQL process had multiple visibility issues. So it was pulling in what to the provider looked like inaccurate information because that client may be receiving services elsewhere that those values are being pulled in. And that's because SQL, when I see SQL, that is a completely different database. It's different than what is generated in art, and we were rife with issues. So in order to address some of that, what we've decided to do was actually revert back to an older process that we had been using prior to 2019. And that's where we ask providers to pull art reports off of out of HMIS, and then send that into us so that we can review it and deem whether a project is in compliance or out of compliance for these four categories of data quality. So it's also evolving a little bit. So what we're doing is utilizing a mix of both art reports and SQL reports for the data quality process. The portions of the SQL report that we're sticking to are the things that we felt were accurate. They're the things that we felt there was that didn't have any kind of visibility issues. So the SQL reports are going to be timeliness, but I'll get into that in a little bit. And so the report time period is going to be looking from January 1st to December 31st, 2019. I know that sounds like a long time, but what it really means is that we're looking at Q4. It's just that we need that the rest of the year to provide further context. And also, it'll be a really great cleanup for any sub-assessments that you may have, sub-assessment mismatches, because if you remember in the process last year, sub-assessments were effectively broken on the data quality, on that SQL data quality report. So we weren't able to give you which sub-assessments needed to be addressed, which clients had mismatches in their sub-assessments, et cetera. So this time around, it'll be a good opportunity to really clean up some of those issues that would affect your APR, et cetera. And the point in time date for this year is going to be October 30th, 2019, and that is going to look at how many clients were enrolled on the night of October 30th against how many units, rooms the project is reported to have. So some point in time means different things to different people. So an emergency shelter may be thinking that this is related to their shelter point data. It actually isn't. So the point in time, this point in time date is really looking at how many clients had an entry without an exit as of October 30th, 2019, and then we compare that against how many beds units you have. And I'll also say that some providers were finding like their units bed list doubled up effectively, but that only happened because of a CES effort to try to automate matches. If you remember late last year, that was something that we were attempting to have go live, but it's something that we've moved away from, and we have since deleted those unit lists that were related to that matching process. So if you look at your numbers now, they should be around to where you had indicated. So they were doubled up because there were two different unit lists. Now we've brought that down to one, so your point in time data will be completely accurate. Should be completely accurate. So as a quick overview, the art reports, which can be downloaded by the user at whatever time they want, will cover the following. It's going to cover missing values, child-only entries, and bed utilization. And the SQL report, which is going to be sent out to agencies automatically by us, will cover the following. It's going to just be based on timeliness. And the reason we're only basing the SQL report on timeliness is because it is just timestamps. Those are things that cannot change. Those are things that we can't pull in from any other provider. It's just your agency. When did you create this entry? what date that you say the client entered, and that's what we're comparing. It's just looking at straight up dates, and that's why we felt comfortable going with SQL for the timeliness report. And the art report will remain accessible throughout the year. You'll be able to change the time frame if need be, but just know that that's now going to be a report that you can rely on to maintain your data quality. And the SQL report will be emailed to the ATA. And we are also going through the process of trying to make this timeliness report an ongoing report that you can monitor, but I'll have more details for you later in the month. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline. February 25th, we sent out a notice to the community. On March 10th, the first round will be due. On March 13th, the unit list updates are due. So if your agency, if you notice that your utilization is off because the wrong number of beds units are there, then you can submit a unit list for us to update in the system. And that is due, the last day to do so is on March 13th. And then the first round results will be posted. So whatever you submitted as of March 10th will be posted on a live receipt, on a Google Sheet live receipt. And then March 24th, that will be when the second round is due, and the 25th, the final results will be posted, and we'll be notifying the ATAs and the EDs in regards to go take a look at their results. So let's get into some of the resources and user support. So we have two very thorough articles on the data quality process, and I'm going to actually click into those because I really want to encourage people to read through those. There's a lot of detail in there. We are continuing to add more detail. As cases come in, we'll try to adapt those cases and use those as sort of troubleshooting examples. So just please look at these two articles. They are really thorough. They're very good, and they sort of walk you through the entire process. So both of those articles will also have a link to the recorded version of this webinar, and I'm also going to make little snippets out of this webinar and some additional materials so that we have sort of bite-sized videos on how to troubleshoot, how to run the report, etc. And then other helpful links are going to be the agency project types, and that's effectively the list of active agencies that we have in the system. DQ receipts, that will tell you which projects are in compliance, which are not. And then additionally, an ATA training series, which is going to go over which goes over some basic functions of an ATA in the system. So let me go ahead and go to one of these articles. Here we go. So as you can see right here, the articles are very thorough. We have different sections dedicated to the timeline, compliance thresholds, etc. So if we want to click down into compliance thresholds, we could see what is required for each of the tabs that we're measuring. And then of course, user support's right down here. The timeliness report, so going over what the process for these reports will be. And then the other report that will be important for you the other article that will be important to review is the running and interpreting the data quality report. And as you can see, we have a pretty thorough guide in terms of even how to access the report itself and schedule it, which is what we recommend. We have a video on how to schedule the reports, how to view the report through the ART system, and then how to access the timeliness report, interpreting the Chicago DQ report. So we go over the tab right here, look through the assessment details, etc. So we try to get as thorough as possible. Here you have what a HUD verification error looks like, and we go through how to fix it. And then for child-only entries, again, it's the same. We show you how to attach children together. We show you what to look for when there's an issue, and then utilization, timeliness, etc. and then we go into how to submit the report itself. So again, it's very thorough. Uh, it's very thorough, and I'd encourage you to read through it, and it will be only getting better as we go ahead and create more material and pull material out of this webinar for, sort of snippet videos. So let's see. In addition to that, uh, this process is a little bit more manual than the SQL process of last year. And we know that there may be further training or assistance for users that are new to the process or that might have forgotten how the pre-SQL process operated. So we're going to be offering office hours every Friday morning, in addition to assistance through the help desk. So a few rules about the office hours. We talk through, the sessions are initially limited to 30 minutes, but we can schedule more time during the week if needed. It's sort of the first touch so that we can get a sense of what your problems are and then help you troubleshoot through those. They're done online, so we will send you uh, a a Microsoft Teams link that you can then join. You should be able to connect automatically, but we want to do these online so that we can screen share with you and talk you through the issues. So if you're the type of person who's used to a phone call, that is going to be much more difficult for both you and us, because we won't be able to demonstrate to you live what some of these solutions can be. And someone that's an agency technical administrator or with our access must be on the call. So uh, some yeah, this just makes it easier to have an ATA there with whoever is making the call. And then we ask that you open a ticket up with us at the help desk, highlighting any specific clients that need troubleshooting. So it'll be a lot easier if we have a case or two to work off of to show you how we would fix various issues. And then make sure that your report is scheduled, or if you don't schedule your reports, that you email it to us beforehand so that we know what report you're working off of. We can work off of that report with you, as opposed to us having to run the report and then your 30 minutes is basically up. Because if we have to run the report during these sessions and we don't have a report that we can work off of, it's really going to eat into your time and your ability to work through different issues with this. And finally, we have a couple of exemption forms and unit list update forms right here. So for a child-only entry, for the most part, there should never be any child-only entries, but we know that there are RIE providers, providers that work largely with youth, and some of those youth may be under the age of 18 and are truly unaccompanied minors. So in those instances, we have a child-only entry exemption form. When you fill that out, that goes to our help desk and it becomes documented there, and we'll apply the exemption after the fact. Then we have our unit list update form. So that's due by March 13th. Again, if your utilization is off, it may be due to this, or if you see that the number of beds units listed are way off, then let us know and we can work through it. The unit list update would be there to help with that. Then we have finally the utilization non-compliance, and things may happen, right? On the night of the pit, if you had construction, if you had something that is necessary, something that might have caused issues for your clients, then feel free to submit that form for us for an exemption. So I got a question by Matt Jaccarino asking, when do we submit the exemptions, and do they have to submit them for each provider? Sorry, I have to open this up. So Matt Jaccarino is asking, when do we submit the exemptions, and do we have to submit them each quarter? So when we submit them as soon as you can. If you see that a client is in fact, considered child only entry when they are in fact actually a truly unaccompanied minor, then let us know as soon as you can. So you can submit them whenever. Those exemptions are not going to be, there's no cutoff for them, but what I will say is that you'll probably want to do it before the well before the second round is due, so that we have time to review it and sort of approve it. So if you submit the exemptions, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, that doesn't mean that we're going to provide we're going to give you that exemption. You may say that your utilization was not in compliance and not really give a reason why. We need time to follow up with you to figure out why. Construction, flooding, things of that nature, we're understanding of, but there may be, if it's a suspect reason, or a reason that doesn't necessarily meet that it was sort of an act of God, or whatever that impacted your utilization for that night, then we might not give you that exemption. So you should do it with time. All right, so moving forward. So let's talk about accessing the reports. And this is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time outside of these slides. Now we're actually going to get into Service Point. And so I also got a question saying, where do you go to the All Chicago website? When I say the All Chicago, when we don't exist on the All Chicago website for the most part, we are at hmis.allchicago.org. So again, that link is hmis.allchicago.org. That's where you'll find the articles, etc. That's where we'll be posting the videos. So it's hmis.allchicago.org, not necessarily allchicago.org. That's our parent site. That's the organization site. But our help desk, our technical help desk, is here. All right, so let's go ahead and log into Service Point. All right, so I'm going to try to shadow someone, and hopefully they have an art license. No, they don't. Great. So in order to be able to actually get into and get the Chicago DQ report, you have to have an art license. And you know that you have an art license when you can see Connect to Art right up here. All ATAs should have an art license, but if you're a project manager or something of that sort, then submit us a help desk ticket to ask for an art license. We fluctuate in how many art licenses go out, just depending on the demand of the providers and how many we have currently available. So at any given time, if we always have to give it to an ATA, but there are times where if you're a project manager or program manager, we may not give it to you because we may be low on it. So just understand that there's always that risk, and we'll always ask you to go to your ATA in order to be able to pull the reports. But anyone with an art license will be able to see this link, Connect to Art. So I'm going to click on it. And so here is the art folder. You could see that everyone will have an inbox. They'll also see the public folder. So while my screen may look a little different than yours, and particularly that I have the favorites folder, everyone will have an inbox. They'll be able to see this, and the public folder. And the Chicago DQ reports actually exist in that public folder. So I'm going to go ahead and expand that out. I click that black arrow right there. Then I'll go to Chicago COC reports. And then data quality, click that black arrow. And the file that we're going to be pulling is the Chicago DQ dash underscore date. So what I want to do is actually schedule this report to run for my All Chicago for my All Chicago Emergency Shelter project, and that's going to be project 883. So what I'll do is click on the magnifying glass, and one thing that some people might want to do is actually click on view report. What we really encourage is for you to schedule reports. Scheduling a report is much more reliable. If you click on view report, it may take up to 15 minutes you to be for you to be able to review your information. So we highly recommend that people use schedule report. It's much more reliable. You could set it to come to you on a daily, by daily, weekly basis, whenever you want. So I'm going to schedule the report and give it some opportunity to load up. It'll take some time. Now, here are the prompts that you have. You do not need to fill out any prompt except for select providers. Again, select providers, that's the second one down, is the only one you need to fill out. EDA provider, enter start date, end date, PIT start date, leave those alone. Those are already complete for you. All you have to do is submit for select providers. That's the only thing you have to fill out. So now with select providers highlighted, we're going to go ahead and click on select. And the majority of you will see this screen, right? So you're going to see this batch selection. You want to see these search results of projects that aren't related to yours. That's fine. Just search for your project. And typically the easiest way to do so is to use the provider ID. So for me, I know that my provider ID is 883. And again, it takes a little bit of time to search. And here we go. So here are my search results, All Chicago Emergency Shelter. That's perfect. I'm going to click add. I'll click, and there's only one project you can select. You can't select multiple projects. It's only for one. This is not something that you can run on a batch basis. So we'll click on submit. We will click on next. Again, we don't have to touch anything else. All we have to do is click on next. And what I'll do here is actually adjust the name. So instead of it showing Chicago DQ dash underscore dash year, what I'll say is that it is, let's see, 0883. That is my HMIS ID. So that's the HMIS ID for the project that I'm running on. Again, that's the All Chicago Emergency Shelter, and that All Chicago Emergency Shelter's ID is 883. Then for the year and month and date, what I'll do is actually put this for when I anticipate submitting the report. So I'm going to plan on submitting the report to Sharon on 2020 03 9. The report format is always going to be in Excel. Uh, so in 2018, when we were doing this old process, we required people to submit both a PDF and an Excel file. This time around, it's only Excel. Don't worry about the PDF, it's only Excel. And then the interval, if you were to do once, you're done, you click on send, and that's it. There's no more that you have to do. However, if we want to run it daily, and I'm going to go through a scenario where I want to have it come to me every 3 days until March 9th, I'll say daily. And actually I'll do every 2 days. And the start date is going to be March 9th, 2020. And that's the end date. And so the start date actually has to be a day the next day. Okay. So it's best practice if you're going to schedule a report to run on a more frequent basis, just set it for the next day as a start date. So I'm going to say 3/6. And then depending on what time you set here, that's the time that the report will run. So if you want your report to run at 6 a.m., you will just do this. And so by the time you get into the office, it'll be ready to go. But what I'd actually recommend is set it to just different times. What I would typically recommend might be 7 or after, and the only reason I'm recommending that is because uh, our vendor will do updates to the system at night, and sometimes those go until early in the morning, like 5:30, 6, and that will impact your report being scheduled. So I'd recommend anytime after 7 p.m., 7 a.m. As being your go-to time to have the report scheduled. So here I'm changing it actually to 8 a.m. I'll click on send. And again, this is going to my user inbox. And we give it some time to process. And so you'll know that you scheduled this report when you click on refresh. And there we go. So you see Chicago DQ right down there, and it's pending. It's going to be running sometime in the future. And where this report will be coming to you is in the inbox. So when we click the drop down, this inbox right here, it'll pop up right up top. So you can see that I've scheduled a couple of reports for myself, like the Chicago DQ right down here. I did that a couple of days ago, etc. So just know that the report, once it's running, when it's done, it'll come over to your inbox. The report takes about 15 minutes to run in total, so just be patient with it. Now, I have a couple of reports actually up for us to be able to look at. So what I want to do is actually give you a quick introduction to a couple of different DQ reports, and then I'll get into the timeliness report as well. So these are all dummy data. These are all reports that we did randomly. So it may not make some sense at times, but just just go with us. This is random data, so that we don't want to use any real live client data at all. So tab A is the summary, and it will really go over it goes over every single tab. So we have missing values and mismatches, so that's sort of the missing values component. Tab C are child-only entries. Tab D is utilization. And I made a point to actually open up a rapid rehousing project, because if you look here for the rapid rehousing project, it shows that bed unit utilization, room unit utilization is not applicable. And the reason it's not applicable is because it's a rapid rehousing project. There are no real consistent beds or units because they fluctuate so much. So if you're rapid rehousing, these are not being calculated for you, so it's not applicable to your project type. But if we look at a PSH provider, let's see if this is the PSH provider, pulling it over. If we look at a PSH provider, then we'd see that that is indeed where we're measuring the unit and room utilization. And so from the utilization section right down here, we also have report parameters. So going over when the report was run, what's the end date, start date, etc. So let me go over each of these tables. These missing values and mismatches, they each go through how many names are missing, how many social security numbers are missing, veteran statuses, etc. And in the column next to it, it's really going over who we're looking for. So we're looking for any client's name. So if you have a client, we expect that they have their name fully reported, their social security number. We anticipate that their SSN should also be fully reported, although there's a little bit of caveat there, and I'll get into that in one of the further tabs. We're only looking at the veteran statuses for adults. For client location, we're only looking at the head of households client location. For domestic violence, we're only looking at any adult members of the household and the head of household. And that's the same for residents prior to project entry and length of stay in previous places. So for the most part, we're measuring data quality on different members of the household. And you'll see here that for income at entry, non-cash benefits, we're looking at both heads of household and any adults in the household. But for insurance, we're looking at both the head of household, adults, and children So that's how you interpret this column. It's really telling you who are we looking at, who are we factoring in on this. So for name, we're measuring all children, adults, heads of household, and for client location, we're only going to be looking at the head of household's client location. Next to there, we have applicable entries. So entries that meet the applicability. They may have a how many clients did we count that are relevant for this, etc. And then we have a calculation of how many missing values are there. So for income at entry, we have two clients that have issues. And then looking here at this missing column, it aggregates the average of that. So it gives you an average of those two missing clients that becomes 11% effectively. And so what we're looking at is for any fields above 5% that will determine the compliance. For any child only entries, if you have one, then you're out of compliance unless you are a project that actually serves underage youth. And then utilization, of course, depending on your project type. For PSH, we're going to be measuring bed and unit. For emergency shelter, we're also going to be measuring bed and unit. Same for safe haven. But one thing to note is that it's either or. So if my unit utilization was within range, it was 100%, but my bed utilization was, let's say, 150% because we housed a particularly large family, then you're still in compliance. So we understand that there are weird issues that happen with bed and units, but as long as one is okay, then you're in compliance. If both of them are off, then you are out of compliance. So if both of these were red, you're out of compliance. But if only one is red, then you are in compliance. So let's look at the assessment detail tab. So this is the assessment detail tab. And one thing that I want to note is that we have actually removed some of the fields regarding approximate date homelessness started, um, number of time homeless, etc., because we plan on reintegrating those, but for now, for this quarter, what we're really concentrating on are the prior living situation, length of stay, and the housing status. So again, we plan on reintegrating those other conditional logic fields back into this, but for now, we're leaving it at these three because that is actually what we're measuring right here. And so what you'll be noticing is that a lot of these say okay. So what we're doing is looking, is there a null value here when there should be? And if you've actually submitted and the client's name is fully there, then it'll show up as okay. Some of these dashes may show up, and those dashes will be there particularly if they are a child-only entry. And let me actually show you an example of what, I'm sorry, not child only, but if they are a child, they'll show up as dashes. So let me pull that up real quick. So here we go. So we have a couple of children here, head of household's child. You could see that some of these are not being factored in, like domestic violence. And again, that's because for domestic violence, we are only looking at adults slash heads of household, and this is a child. This is someone that's under the age of 18. So these dashes don't mean that, it doesn't mean that something's missing. What it typically means is that this field is not applicable to that particular client, so we're not measuring that for the clients. Like you can see here with prior living situation, we're only looking at that for the head of households that are over the age of 18. This child here is over the age of 18. Yeah, and that's why it's showing up. So they are an adult in that household. Now, what you're really going to be looking for are these red fields and any of these fields like DKR, etc. That's the best. These are going to be the things that should really pop out to you. And in particular, what you may be seeing, and if I can make this any bigger, are going to be a series of mismatches, HUD verifications, particularly for the insurance, non-cash benefits, and income sections of the report. So again, this is the details tab. This is showing you all the missing values. Here we have our demographics, our housing situations, and then our sub-assessments and destination to exit, caseworker, etc. Now, getting into some of the child-only entries, here we have a couple of child-only entries. And what typically is meant by a child-only entry is that it's it's a child that was entered without their parents. So, one common thing that we see is that if there's an expectant mother in a project, then she has her baby. That baby is sometimes entered separately from the mom because the agency sort of thought that it would link them together, but Service Point doesn't automatically do that. You typically have to there's a bit of a process in order to link that child together with the household. And then another reason that people would be considered child-only entries is if they have no date of birth entered. So those are a few of the things that you can look out for. Now, in terms of bed utilization, again, we're looking at the number of beds and rooms provided. And here you can see that it's listing out all the entry dates, the housing move-in dates, and that's not applicable here. But just listing out all the clients that had an open entry as of October 30th, 2019. And then this final tab is something that I want to go over really quickly. This is sort of an informational tab. For a while, we were asking providers, we were measuring the data quality of dates of birth and social security numbers, but it's something that's relatively hard if you're particularly working in an outreach project to be able to collect that on the first basis with a client. But it does affect your APR. The APR tracks how many clients have responded to you saying that they don't know or they refused or that the data was not collected. So what we wanted to do was sort of give agencies a status check on how many clients indicated that they don't know their SSN, they don't have their full date of birth, etc. So here you can see that it's a pretty simple process that, if we wanted to correct these, we would just ask the client, or if we have a SSN on hand, put it in there and then changes to reflect that the full date of birth is indicated. Again, these are fine. These are fine. You can keep them that way, but it will impact your APR. So we encourage everyone to constantly get this information as detailed and up to date from the client as possible. All right, so I want to show you the timeliness report. The timeliness report will go out to providers today. And mind you, timeliness does not change. It's not something that we can alter. So whereas the missing values, utilization, child-only entries, you can fix those, timeliness is not able to be fixed. So here we break out into multiple tabs. So we have entry timeliness, housing move-in date timeliness, exit timeliness, and then shelter services if that's applicable to you. For me, I ran this on a rapid rehousing project, so I have multiple housing move-in dates. And if you remember, for housing move-in dates, it's 2 business days to enter the housing move-in date of when your client actually spent time in their unit. For entries, we ask that providers enter a client into the system within 2 days of them coming to them for services and being enrolled into their project. And then, of course, for exit timeliness, again, we ask that providers indicate within 2 days of the client exiting that they exited in the system. Now, with that having been said, let's go ahead and actually try some troubleshooting. So I'm going to start off with some of the simpler ones first. Now, let's take someone who has multiple demographics missing. So here I have my client missing demographics. So what we have to do is actually go to immediately what I can notice is that Social Security is missing. So let's check out our client profile. And this is an approximate or partial start date, and we don't have an answer to whether they are a U.S. military veteran, and also name data quality is partial. So let's say that this is all inaccurate and I actually do have their full information. So I'll just change this to full name reported. Let's say it's Missy M demographics, and we get the full social. We can change that over. And then the U.S. military veteran, we'll say no. So we go back to entry exit, and let's open up our client at entry. And if we scroll down, let's look here. So this client's missing their primary race. And if we answer that, that would clear that up. And then here is a particularly severe issue that you may encounter sometimes. So notice here, housing status, we have category 1 homeless, but no prior living situation, no length of stay in previous place, even though we know that they've been answered. And the reason we know they've been answered is because there is this green colored box next to it. Now, this colored box may be orange, yellow, etc. That's dependent on the length of time that it took to get updated. So when we click on that, you could see that what will happen sometimes is if someone comes in here and let's say it's a simple mistake. It's honestly a simple mistake sometimes. So let's say they want to check, oh, so they're homeless, but they accidentally click on select, and if they go down to save, that select, this blank value, will write over whatever was the latest value. So here I'm going to go back. If you look at the history answer, and you can do this too. So if you click on this box and you're the ATA, you can see that I accidentally answered a blank value. So I inserted that, and that wrote over the place not meant for human habitation. So what I have to do is actually delete this blank value for it to start to pull in. And you'll notice that I actually don't have the permission. So what you'll have to do is actually talk to your ATA, or if you're an ATA and you're not able to do that, shoot us an email with a client ID, and we can delete the blank response for you. But these blank responses are the reason that these are pulling through. And even if I were to go in and actually try to write over that value, let's say I want to fully answer this, and I say, all right, I'm going to put place not meant for human habitation back in, that wouldn't necessarily help. We need to get rid of that blank value. That blank value will constantly be popping up into your report. Uh, so continuing to try to select over this will not help you at all. It's best just to delete this blank value. And if you can't do it, then let us know and we'll do it for you. So those were some of the issues we had with some of the missing demographics. Again, uh, when you in this scenario, you would email us and then we would delete those fields, those blank questions. Um, and the next day the report would work like clockwork for you. So now, if we want to go on to mismatch and verification, so we have a client that has mismatches at both entry and at exit. So I'm going to open up her entry assessment. And if we scroll down, one important thing is a mismatch will occur if the client's record, if you say up here that they have a disabling condition, they should have that here. So here, yes, we're fine. The client does have a mental health issue, and we indicated that yes, the client does have a disabling condition. But then if we come down here to income, again, we're fine here, which is perfect. So we said no up here, no to income. Now let's check this one. So this is where a mismatch will occur. If for non-cash benefits, you indicate no right up here, but when you click on HUD verification, that there is a yes, this client is actually receiving SNAP benefits, that will write over you, that will cause a mismatch error. So what we have to do in order to fix that is change that no to a yes. And when we go to save that, that will correct the issue. That should correct the issue. And then for covered by health insurance, you'll see an error that comes up as HUD verify. And the reason that's coming up is because we didn't complete it. So for this client, I'm going to say no, they don't receive health insurance. And I still have to complete the HUD verification. So it should always be a green check mark, not the triangle, the red triangle. And I'll say no right here. Scroll down, save and exit, and we now have addressed all of our issues. So we're going to click on save and exit. And when we scroll up, here we go. Now for our exit date, we have a couple of issues. For what we're going to find is that our client has now received income, and that'll be the biggest change. So they completed program, they're staying with family on a permanent tenure. And again, we know that their main issue is going to come from monthly income. So here, now the client is earning monthly income. They're earning $1,000 of earned income. And that started on September 1st, 2019. And look up here, income from any source is still no. We have to change that to a yes, because now they are indeed receiving income. And we also want to close out this other source of earned income. So, sorry. Instead of clicking on HUD verification, what we're going to do is actually click on the magnifying glass. We're going to sort this by source of income. Here we have our blank value for monthly income, and what I'm going to put an end date to this blank value to be 8/30/2019. Because again, this is how we, sorry, 8/30. Actually, I think it's 31. There we go, 2019. So what we're doing is effectively sort of closing out this earned income that wasn't earning anything, and then replacing it with the earned income that is now making $1,000. So this will have fixed your monthly income issue and your mismatch at exit. Click on save and exit. And I know we are over time, but for whomever else can join us, what I want to go through in one last scenario is actually children who are entered separately. So I'm going to pull up this user. This is a mother and a child who were entered separately. So Sam is the one who will have shown up in my report as being a child-only entry. So when I click on Julia's, I see that Julia is not attached to any household member. When I go to Sam's profile, I can see that Sam's entered, but again, he is not attached to any household member. And if we go even one step further and look at the assessment itself, it's only Sam who's enrolled in here, because anyone who's connected should be, any household member should be connected with each other. You can easily switch between their assessments here. So what we're going to have to do is actually go back to Julia's page. And what I'm going to do is actually click on the entry date. And we're going to click on include additional household members. And here's Sam, check his name off, continue, save and continue. And there we go. So now we've connected Sam together. Sam and his mom are now connected with one another, and this will take care of your child-only entry issue. So I also want to put a forewarning that sometimes this is a little difficult, particularly if there is a new child born, or if if additional family members come in after the initial entry date. So let's say that the provider had talked with let's say that the child came back to live with the mom in the shelter 2 weeks into the mom's tenure at the shelter. Well, in that instance, what you're going to do is actually simply uh, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, and what I'd recommend is actually sending the HMIS team an email to helpdesk at All Chicago, and we can walk you through it, because it is a little difficult to get a handle of. So with that, I know we have multiple questions, but I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to them today. Please, if you have a question, feel free to submit it to the help desk, and we can address it on the help desk as need be. Thank you very much, and this will be recorded and posted up on the help desk. So again, thank you very much, and feel free to always reach out to us for any assistance. Have a great one.